my name is Jerry Kaye, and I'd like to welcome you to Sunrise Sunset. When I was a little boy, I used to visit my grandmother's apartment, and I remember that downstairs there was another family that lived in the apartment below that used to involve themselves in terrible arguments. Arguments in which I was sure not just words were exchanged, but blows as well. And I used to run to my grandmother in fright and fear, as a little boy might, and she used to hold me and tell me that I shouldn't ever have to worry about that, because that never happened in Jewish homes. Well, today I'm afraid that that myth, that there is no violence in Jewish homes, is no longer the case. And to discuss that issue, I have three guests with me today who are going to talk about an organization called Shalva, the Hebrew word for tranquility and an acronym for Shelter, Assistance, and Legal Aid for the Victims of Abuse. My guests today are first Shoshi Kahn, who is a board member of Shalva and a social worker in Chicago for the Response Center. Second, Renee Lepp, the executive director of the ARC, which is an emergency service organization, and she'll tell us more about that. And finally, Sherry Berliner. Sherry is a staff attorney for the Legal Assistance Foundation of Chicago and works closely with Shalva. First, Sherry, I'd like to ask you about that myth. Is it true? And tell us whether or not there is abuse in Jewish homes, as we've heard in so many other places.
I'm afraid your grandmother was wrong on that one issue in any event. There is abuse in Jewish homes, and it is the myth that Jewish domestic violence doesn't exist that in many ways hurts the victims of abuse most. While we do not have information about whether or not violence in Jewish homes is as extensive as it is in the rest of the world, and we suspect it is not as extensive, nonetheless it exists between husbands and wives, between boyfriends and girlfriends, between parents and children. And it's that very invisible violence that Shalva seeks to address.
Now, your concern is not just as an attorney, but as a woman involved in the community.
That's right, closely involved in my community, who has, unfortunately, I've seen victims of domestic violence. I've worked with victims of domestic violence in the community and have seen the pain that they must face.
Renee, the ARC is involved in all kinds of community assistance. How did it come to be involved in this particular aspect?
Well, basically, the ARC is a crisis intervention center, and certainly domestic violence falls into that category. And because Shalva has a unique program where they don't duplicate or replicate services that are already existing in the community, all of the ARC's 130 ancillary services are open to the people who need it.
Tell me about that unique program. How do they avoid doing the same sorts of things that you and so many others do?
Shalva.
Shalva.
Well, if Shalva needs if Shalva victims need medical assistance, we have that. They can come to the ARC. If they need dental, if they need counseling, if they need help in almost any area, we can certainly either do it in-house or refer them to other Federation sister agencies, so that Shalva itself does not duplicate things and spend money, community money, unwisely.
Mm-hmm. Shoshi, what is the typical case? I mean, what is it that you will see in the course of your work with the organization, with abused women?
There is no typical case. Being I'm a member of the board, I don't see cases at all. Matter of fact, the beauty of Shalva is that there's that we don't see cases, people on the board. We just deal with the concrete services. When we started, we decided that we would deal with the food and dealing with the ARC people, dealing with other Federation agencies, and that we would let the social workers and the intake workers deal with the victims themselves.
Well, let me understand. There is no typical case, so that if a woman feels that she's the victim of physical or emotional abuse, is either one an alternative?
Right. We'll deal with physical abuse, we'll deal with emotional abuse. A woman might say to us that she has no physical scars, but that she's being locked in her home for hours at a time. Her husband is extremely jealous, or a boyfriend, or whatever, and we'll just deal with that.
Not limited to wives, it may be
It may be boyfriend, girlfriend, it may be a child's abusing a parent. Renee can tell us cases of abuse where a child was abusing her mother. We've had husbands abused. Anyone can call, we'll service anyone.
Okay. Renee, elder abuse?
Elder abuse where, for some reason, children take it out on their parents for who knows why. But we've had an elderly woman who made use of the Shalva shelter who was abused by a daughter, and we currently have a 74-year-old gentleman who the police brought to us with 4 broken ribs, who was thrown down the stairs by a son.
Now
And
we're talking about senior citizens
senior
primarily,
citizens,
who are the victims of the violence of their own children.
right, and who knows what trauma is going on in the lives of the children, but nevertheless, these people need a safe refuge, a place to rest both and to hopefully heal the scars that are both physical and psychological scars. I really wanted to relate to your opening statement about being running to your grandmother as a frightened little boy. We've had children, you can imagine if a child actually, you just heard, but if a child actually heard and saw that kind of a scene, they are really the silent victims of abusive situations, and our heart really goes out to these children because they too are victims.
Sure. Sherry, tell me, what if there is a case where a woman believes she's being abused, or anyone feels to be the victim of abuse, what should they do? How do they get in touch with Shalva? What steps will follow? Do they have to go to you? Will you go to them? How does it work?
Okay, the first and most important thing that any victim of any abuse must do is protect him or herself. And I would love to say, get on the phone and call us and we'll be there immediately. The reality is a person needs to take steps to make sure that they're immediately safe. If that means leaving the abusive environment, that's what it means. If it means locking a door to keep an abusive person out, that's what it means. The first thing is physical safety. Thereafter, what would happen is that a client could contact us. We have an 800 hotline number that is available 24 hours a day, that is staffed by volunteers who are trained in dealing with these problems. And the person who needs Shalva services or just wants to talk or wants information for a friend or needs some general advice could call any time of day or night, and we would attempt to help that person immediately.
Now, where is your location? Is there an apartment, first of all, or a house?
Shalva is really several things. Shalva is a physical shelter which is located in a secret location in the city of Chicago. In addition, Shalva provides services, as we said, at the ARC and at other agencies, and provides services as well to people who are not in the shelter. And that's most important. It's our hope that people will come to us not only when the violence has become so terrible that they need physical safety, but also beforehand, when the violence is escalating and they need other sorts of services to help them remedy the broken relationship or troubled relationship that exists.
Well, does that mean that if I am feeling or my wife is feeling concern, or any woman or person in the community, that then call to Just Talk and you'll give them some guidance and help? Or?
Absolutely. In fact, statistics that show in dealing with victims of domestic violence that people may need to call 3, 4, 10, 15 times before they're willing to leave a situation or able to leave a situation. In addition, our hope is that people need not necessarily leave all situations, that hopefully a broken relationship can be mended while remaining in the relationship. It's not Shalva's policy to make decisions about people's relationships for them. They need to make those decisions themselves. So we provide counseling and other information to people at all stages of the abuse spectrum, not only when the physical abuse is so dangerous that it becomes life-threatening.
Mm-hmm. Now, Shoshi, you're a social worker professionally. Will people receive counseling, psychological counseling over the phone, or will you recommend that they see a particular therapist, or how does Shalva operate in that regard?
What Shalva does is, as soon as a person calls up, they speak with the intake worker, who just views them and sees what the story is. She'll meet with the woman if the woman wants, if she wants to come into the shelter, and if she doesn't, she just wants advice, then this intake worker is a trained professional and she will talk to them. Part of the program is that these women must receive some kind of counseling, and we provide different agencies and different services for the counseling. The children can receive counseling, the victim receives counseling, the husband can receive counseling, and we work together with the family. Shalva provides the program that's appropriate for this individual. Each client has her own agenda and has her own itinerary, and we provide the services to meet that.
It sounds like you have all kinds of activities that you're providing for people. How big is this place? Even though I can't, you won't tell me where the location is, how big is the apartment?
Well, we have one very small room. We rent a one-bedroom apartment, and it's quite small. We need expansion. We need more safe homes. We need a lot of help in that area. we could use some other help in other areas, and that's about it. But we do provide a lot of help for a lot of people, and fortunately for us, whenever the need has come up for more than one person being in an abusive situation, we've been able to rely on the community and other places to provide safe homes and things like that.
Renee, you're involved in crisis intervention in all kinds of circumstances in people's lives. How important is this compared to the spectrum that you see? I'm sure you deal with poverty and hunger and illness and all of the issues of human condition. Is this a real crisis that we're confronting, something different?
Sure, it's a crisis, and because of all of these other human conditions, some of these things are the factors that cause the domestic violence. I mean, it can be trauma, a man loses his job, can't find something. It can be outside pressures that are so pervasive in society today that will cause the ultimate thing that we're talking about. All of these things that we're talking about don't necessarily take place in this apartment that Shoshi is talking about. This is just a refuge, a safe place. The counseling and the peer group support, and if a woman wants to seek pastoral guidance, either rabbis from within the community or her own rabbi, she's given a list. It's not mandatory, but it is available for her. All of these things are basically done outside of the confines of the Shalva shelter. So,
now, you bring up an interesting question. There are all kinds of organizations that I read about and hear about in the normal course of the day that deal with abused women and all kinds of domestic violence. Why a special place for Jewish women?
First of all, Jewish women feel the cultural stigma that we talked about, and I think they just feel much more comfortable in an environment that caters to the things that they are used to. Many of the other shelters, some of them are non-sectarian, but a lot of shelters are sponsored by different kinds of Christian groups, and they may be afraid of proselytizing in these shelters. And I think women just feel more comfortable in an atmosphere that is Jewish and caring and loving. And it also says that the Jewish community understands their problem, loves them, and is accepting them, and is trying to access them to other Federation and Jewish-related agencies.
If I can add something.
We take care of our own.
Okay.
If I can
Please.
add something to that, I was recently at the National Conference of the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and there were thousands of participants from around the country. At one of the workshops entitled Jewish Women Don't Really Get Battered, Do They?
My grandmother again.
Your grandmother again. Several people said explicitly, several victims, Jewish victims of domestic violence said, I went to other shelters, I looked for help, and sometimes I got help, and sometimes I was said, but you can't, it was said, you know, you can't be abused, you're Jewish, and Jewish men don't beat their wives, that's why we were always told to marry Jewish men, right? And a series of jokes were said to these women who were not in the place to hear those jokes. They needed recognition that as Jewish women, they are being abused, and they need services accessible to them. In addition, Shalva is a shelter that provides kosher dining facilities, kosher food and kosher kitchen facilities to people who come to Shalva. That's critical. If somebody does abide by the laws of kashrut, then they need a place where they can eat. Imagine trying to go for a safe place, take your children, and yet you can't eat anything.
How long can I stay there?
Well, that depends on the needs of the clients.
Basically, we have a 90-day limit, and then we try to place them and help them put their lives together. That's usually enough time to get them some assistance. Perhaps we can get them onto the public aid, or find a job for the woman, or at least stabilize the situation to get her out of the shelter and into start mainstreaming her into some type of community activity, whether it be
Shoshi.
work or otherwise.
Thank you. Shoshi, let me ask you another question. I can stay there for 90 days. You'll feed me. You'll provide me with an apartment. I guess you'll take care of any clothing needs that I might have, and I can bring the kids. How much are you going to charge me for this?
No, there's no charge whatsoever, and we rely on the community and other communities for funds. We're writing grants, we're doing other things, but we really do need quite a few funds to help staff this and house this. But the truth is that we don't just let you sit in the apartment and be housed and be given food.
I can't read mysteries and eat bonbons.
Not exactly, not exactly. In that time, it's a healing process, and we allow you a few weeks to heal, and then it's, let's get your
Act together.
good.
Take it back on the road, right?
Right, and let's start getting you back into life.
Tell me, who sponsors Shalva?
Well, we do. We're very much private sponsorship. We go to the community for funds. We write grants. We do receive some funds from organizations, and we beg the community to give us some money.
So what you're saying then is that if there were people in the community who wanted to make contributions to the organization, this is an appropriate thing that they could do.
This is a wonderful thing for them to do, and we can even give them an address of where to send these funds.
Well, we'll give you a chance to do that in just a minute.
Right.
What if I don't speak English? There are lots of
problem.
people who come to the community from the Soviet Union, I know, and from other countries.
That's right, and Shalva is a shelter that we will make accessible to all Jewish people, mostly women, obviously, since women typically are the victims. If interpreters are needed, interpreters are provided. If whatever a person needs, Shalva will create a program to fit that person's needs. While we would like people to get their act together and take it on the road as quickly as possible, we recognize that healing varies person to person. We recognize that people live on different timetables and have different needs, and for that reason, we don't have a set program. We instead build that around the person who comes to us.
One of the beauties of Shalva that hasn't been mentioned is that we not only provide the shelter care for those 90 days, but what happens is that even afterwards we continue with the client and we stay with them. Most shelters allow the person to stay a certain amount of time, and then when the person leaves, that's it. But we stick with the person, we keep in contact with them, and we do quite a bit of follow-up care. I mean, our intake workers are really wonderful.
Okay. Renee, I want to ask you a different question. You talked earlier about elder abuse. What about incest or husbands who may feel abused, or even children?
Well, we won't take any child per se, an individual child under the age of 18 because of state regulatory laws, but we have had victims of incest who have come from all over the country. I had a girl coming from the far southwest. We've had cases of domestic violence from the west and the southwest and other areas in the Midwest. Incest is common, unfortunately. I mean, not as common, again, as in the general community, but it exists. We have had 2 gentlemen who were victims also of domestic violence. So that exists too, and that I think is a very, very small percentage, but it should be recognized that it does exist.
So Shalva is not just limited to women, but to any member of the family, although your primary focus is women.
Right, but we are talking about domestic violence, and that covers the whole gamut.
Okay. There used to be an organization in Chicago, or a movement that was called Bitachon, the Hebrew word for defense, which I know was sponsored originally by the Union of American Hebrew Congregations. Does that still exist? Is Shalva a successor to it? What essentially has happened?
We worked with Bitachon in the beginning. We talked with them, and they do not exist any longer. They existed about 2 years ago, or they stopped existing actually about 2 years ago, and we just started our roles around then. So we're continuing their work. We actually created a shelter. They were in the forming stages of the shelter. So there is no longer a Bitachon.
Okay, I want to turn to another question, and that is, how many people do you serve? In the course of a year, 90 days, you say somebody might stay as long as 90 days, and you only have an apartment that will hold one or perhaps a few families at a time. How many families can you serve at one time? How many do you serve over a year?
Well, Shalva is very new. They'll be celebrating, I guess, their 2nd anniversary around June. So in the year and a half, I would say that we have seen 18 families in the shelter, and several more outside who have not yet found the need to come in. Of those 18, we have had probably 10 children, and I think as the word spreads and the reputation spreads, the need will grow, and we're going to need to expand, and Shalva's looking towards expansion in the future.
Okay. Now, much as we'd like to, not everybody in the country sees this particular edition of Sunrise Sunset, and I'm interested in knowing what else you do to let people know about Shalva's existence.
We have a speakers bureau, and we go around the entire community, going to sisterhoods, going to other temples, and any place that we're invited to, actually, and we speak just all over. We're trying to get community education really to reach everywhere. I mean, we scream out, you know, we exist, we're here, and we do have a lot of speaking engagements.
Sherry, are you one of the speakers?
I have been a speaker, but not in the formal speaking engagements. I've been more involved with training the Shalva staff in certain aspects of domestic violence.
Tell us about that. What kind of staff do you have, and what kind of training do they receive?
Well, the staff is almost all volunteers at this point. And the Shalva volunteers have educated themselves as to the realities of domestic violence, both in the world at large and in the Jewish community. In addition, they have had seminars about other resources available in the community and about a person's legal and practical opportunities once a person decides to deal with the domestic violence in their life. I particularly did a training on the legal aspects and what to do once the phone call is made.
Something that's interesting about Shalva is that everyone is volunteer. So our speakers bureau is volunteer, and our entire staff is volunteer. Our intake worker is a volunteer. We just work on volunteers, and so far it's going real well.
What kind of reaction do you get from sisterhoods and from other mainstream Jewish community organizations when you talk about women's violence?
Well, some will say it doesn't exist, but the experience of Shalva has been that every time we've spoken to a large group, afterwards either a phone call is made to the speaker or to the worker because the information is passed out, or somebody will be hanging back after the speech to speak to the worker. So I don't think that any speaker from Shalva has ever gone out where they haven't received at least one or two inquiries from the audience who has either identified herself as a victim or a friend and asked how they can help that friend. And of course, that friend may be themselves.
Right, I have a friend who...
Right, and if I can add one thing about that, Shalva has spoken to all aspects of the Jewish community, people who are unaffiliated with congregations, people in Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, Reconstructionist, Traditional, the whole gamut of congregations. And domestic violence exists in every subsector of that community, and people need to understand that. It's not isolated to everyone but us. It's always the us and them and everyone else in our community.
Now, but Sherry, you're an attorney, and I think I'd like to ask you to speak to one particular question that occurs to me. If a woman comes to Shalva and she claims physical abuse and, in fact, demonstrates marks of beating and brutality, is the next step that a police car is going to go with sirens screaming up to her house and
Absolutely
lights
not.
flashing?
Absolutely not. Thank you for asking that question. Shalva helps people do what they want done. Many women have no interest in involving the criminal justice system in their lives. That's understandable. The impersonal sort of response that you're describing is terrifying to many people. If it would even happen, we would like to think the police would always be there, but they're not always there. That's another issue. People are not dragged into court to bring the abuser in front of a judge and, you know, have it all out. People get the services they need. If a woman needs physical protection, she gets physical protection. If she needs legal protection,
How does she
gets
get
legal
physical protection?
She can come to the shelter, and the shelter is in a secret, absolutely confidential location. It is not available. The husband will not be able to find her there. No one will be able to find her there unless she gives that information to people. And even then, she's restricted to who she can give that information to.
You know, I want you to talk about that for just another second.
Sure.
I kind of pride myself on being able to find out anything I need to know. Now, if, and I'm sure that there are lots of people who are sitting here saying, no, my husband's going to find it, or my wife is going to find it. They really can't get access.
Well, they really can't, and in addition, if for any reason they do get access, Shalva is not just one apartment building. Shalva is an apartment building, it's a series of safe homes, it's a series of other facilities that we can house people at. So should for any reason, and this has never happened yet, but should for some reason the secrecy of that location be violated, there are other places for people to go, and we've built that safety net in, so that the person who comes to us is 100% safe.
Shoshi, what happens afterward? Now, the woman comes to Shalva, goes to a safe house, goes to the apartment, there's all kinds of counseling, etc. What's the general prognosis in these 2 dozen or thereabouts families who've been with you.
Well, she has a choice how she wants to follow up on the case. We don't push divorce, we don't push staying together. Whatever she wants, whatever she feels safe with, that's what we'll try and help her get through. And I just want to mention that the services that we receive are all community services. They are basically Federation and ARC services, and Evanston Shelter gives us a service too. And we could not exist without these services because we don't duplicate. And it's important to know that the whole community really works together on this issue, which is really nice.
Generally, it depends on how many years the woman has been involved in the situation. A certain percentage, probably 5 to 10% of the women that we have seen have returned back to the situation, and God willing, it will work out. Maybe it won't, and we'll see them again. We don't know. It's a pattern. We had a woman who came to us from the West Coast who waited until the children were grown and then decided to flee and needed a place to help just rest and get her act together. She knew exactly what she wanted to do. She had planned this for years, almost in the way I guess somebody plans a suicide. She really had it planned out step by step, and as soon as her last child was married, there she was.
How did somebody from the West Coast find you?
They found us through calling the Federation. The Federation there, who called the Federation here, who gave them the 1-800 number, and that's how they found us.
We've talked about that 1-800 number a lot. Now let's tell the folks what that number is. It's 1-800-248-1818. 1-800-248-1818. But what if I can't get to a phone, or if I just want to drop you a line, and is there a way to do that?
They have to write to us in the P.O. Box. It's Project Shalva, 1744 West Devon Avenue, P.O. Box 53, Chicago, Illinois, 60660.
So that either I can call or write, and I will have some response from Shalva.
Right.
Doesn't matter if I'm a Chicagoan, doesn't matter if I'm a man, a woman, a child.
That's right.
In any case, Shalva will provide those kinds of help for my family, for myself,
For anyone.
who needs the kind of help that you
Any Jewish
particularly
We've
provide.
had no geographic boundaries. We've sheltered a woman from Israel, so we will go all over. Anybody from all over the world, we will help.
And if you don't want to come, call. We're here to
Shalva,
help.
thank you. Shalva Tranquility says that we provide temporary kosher refuge for victims of abuse. Women who are unable to protect themselves and or their children from physical harm can find solace in a traditional and comforting environment that supports Jewish identity. Shalva, shelter, assistance, legal aid for victims of abuse on this edition of Sunrise, Sunset.